when people go, for example, to a faith healer and they believe, or at least they're open to the belief in it, then they very well might have positive health outcomes from it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to our super fun, super interesting podcast, the Questions and Almost Answers podcast, with me, Matt, and Greg here together with us today. I am the little pastor, and he is the big pastor of Hampton Baptist Church. And we are always excited to talk about strange biblical topics. What do these things mean? How do we live based on these things? And we've got a couple of great questions for today. I'm excited to tackle them. Greg, what are the questions we have for today?
Well, is the power of healing still active? And if it is, what does that look like? Like, should we be going to faith healers? But all of that. So yeah, we'll get into that one.
Fascinating.
The other question is, what about Rahab's lie? Do the
Mm,
ends justify the means? So if you know that story, you know exactly what we're talking about. If you don't know that story, you got to keep watching
yeah, stick
and
around.
then
The
you will
story
know
will be,
exactly what we're talking about.
it'll be explained.
Yep.
If you have any comments, any thoughts, we'd love to talk to you about any of these things. Even if you want clarification or you want to poke holes, like we love just talking about this stuff. Please write down in the comments or send one of us a message. The power of healing. This is interesting. I think for me, I've always grown up in quite a conservative background in church. I think I've kind of switched and morphed over time, but things like healing, I'm always a little skeptical, and I'm curious about this thing. Because we certainly see people, we see Jesus healing, we see the apostles healing later,
Mhm.
and so I think, what about now? There are people who have claimed to be healed. There are videos of people being healed allegedly. What are we to believe here? I don't know.
Yeah. So I don't know either.
Okay.
I think I've got a kind of like a gut opinion on this one. I definitely have studied it in years past and read um, kind of the both sides of the issue. Tried to read some of the stories about these miracles that allegedly have happened in recent times, and I don't know, but there is a framework for us. Like it's not that everything is unknowable. The Bible does give us some pretty clear instruction and information on miracles.
Mm,
And first of all, like what we need to understand is that miracles and things like speaking in tongues and those type of things, sometimes they're called sign gifts.
mm,
And the reason is, well, especially tongues was called a sign. It was a sign to the Jews, but the miracles as well were also a sign. And oh, Matt, what does a sign do?
it shows you something or it tells you something.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so these miracles, these speaking in tongues, these things that occurred were a signpost to the Jewish people saying that God was doing something.
Mm,
And so, um, for example, the predictions about the Messiah also predicted that he would do these miracles, that he
mm,
would the consequences of sin and the um I guess the ammunition of the enemy, which is
mm,
like death, suffering, um, hurt, curse, all of that stuff, all of the ammunition of the enemy, uh, Jesus was going to disarm. And
mm,
so while he was here on earth and he did those things that are miraculous, right? He was disarming them. He was dealing with human suffering, showing that he had power over it. He was raising people from the dead, showing he had power over death. And this was a sign. This was a loud announcement to the Jewish people that your Messiah is here.
he's here.
And so that's what the miracles were for, is to show this work of God. And if you track it through the history of the Bible, whenever God did something quote unquote new,
Mm,
um, miracles were always part of it. For example, when Israel became a nation, every young person growing up in church know the stories of the Exodus
right.
and the plagues and those miracles that happened, right? So so you've got all of those miracles occurring as a sign from God that what he was doing here was from him. This was not some natural occurrence
Mm,
of a nation arising. Um, God was the source of it.
mm,
So the miracles come as a sign, as a declaration that this is from God.
right,
So so that leads us to some expectations of when miracles would occur,
right.
right? So whenever you see this a transition, you see you see this outpouring of miracles where God puts his stamp of approval and says, "This is from me."
Mm,
Um, so so yeah, that in a sense is the background of miracles and maybe let me ask you this, Matt. Like,
of
what's your
course.
bar? Like, how high does the bar have to be for you to call it something a miracle?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me personally, like I like to believe I think I'm a little bit of a skeptic. So I like to see something that would be reasonably astounding.
Okay.
If I can judge it like that. I don't well, I don't know. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say, all right, so my forearm is gone, but then it heals back. I don't know if it would go that far, but I think the ones that I'm always interested in would be like, okay, so this person was in a coma that medically they were not, doctors would say in every situation, they were not going to be alive from this. And then they are. Or somebody medically never able to walk again. And the doctors are astounded when they see them walking after that. Um, like those things, I'm like, okay, I think I think there's something to that.
Yeah, so I would be in a similar camp, maybe a little more extreme than you.
Mm,
I would be looking for the forearm to come back.
okay, cool, yeah.
So here's where my definition of miracle would come in is when there is no other explanation other than the quote unquote supernatural. In other
Mm,
words, there is no room for this in the natural order.
mm,
So, um, for example, when we talk about people recovering from these comas or people getting the use of their legs back after a back injury, what we're dealing with is statistics, right?
right,
So so there's like a 99.98% chance that you will never walk again,
right.
right? So when you get that like 0.02, you get that one that does walk, that is so unlikely that people call it a miracle,
Mm,
right? Where I would say, no, the body is incredibly good at healing, right?
mm,
And I can't prove that that was God intervening or some other supernatural force intervening. I can't prove that.
mm,
So so if you look at the type of miracles Jesus did,
mm.
they were undeniable ones. He did give people their limbs back, right? He
Yeah.
did like a guy had his ear cut off and he just whoop,
How do
puts
you
it back
calm a
on, right?
storm? Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Walk on water. Like these are things uh raising somebody from the dead who is already deep in the decay process for four
Mm,
days and no embalming. Like these are things that you can't conjure up. This is not like it's not statistically unlikely for
mm,
somebody to to rise from the dead after 4 days and being de in the decay process. It's not statistically unlikely. It is
Impossible.
zero.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, it is zero for somebody who is full of leprosy and has lost fingers and toes and their nose and all that stuff to get all of that back in front of a crowd. Like
Mm,
there is no statistic for that because that is not possible.
right.
So those are the type of documented miracles that you have done by Jesus that were seen by crowds, by witnesses that wrote it down, that died defending these things, right?
Mm,
So those type of things I would call absolutely miracles.
mm,
And they were a sign that, hey, what is happening here is from God. It is
mm,
not some human invention. So my bar for miracles is very high. And the Bible talks about the fact that there are other sources of miraculous things other than him.
oh, really?
Yeah, like you remember Jesus saying, there'll be many who say, Lord, Lord,
But we
like
but we cast out demons and we
yeah, we
prophesied
did
in your
miraculous
name.
signs and we did all these
Yeah.
things in your name, right? And you say, hey, depart from me, I never knew you. So
Fascinating.
there, just because somebody can do something that's like, wow,
Mm,
or there's a crowd of people and somebody's hip pain goes away or they walked hunched over, now they walk straight. Like just because those things happen does not mean A, it's a miracle, or B, that it's even from God, right?
interesting.
So give you an example, like um, it is a proven thing that placebo effect is real,
Oh,
right?
yeah, certainly.
Matter of fact, so much so that in recent, like within the last year, there's been research done where they've actually found the mechanism physically in our bodies for the placebo effect and have been able to trigger it. So far, they've been doing it in mice, but
Mm,
they can trigger it and get the positive health responses um, just because they know physiologically how to trigger the placebo effect, right? Like, so it's a real thing. Like people actually have better health outcomes if they believe something is going to give them healing,
mm,
right? So when people go, for example, to a faith healer and they believe, or at least they're open to the belief in it, then they very well might have positive health outcomes from it. Like it might actually be good for their health.
mm,
That doesn't mean it's a miracle. It means their body is functioning the way it was intended to function.
right.
Um, so the other thing is when you get crowds of people together and they are passionate about something, that in itself can trigger health responses, right? So in so much of what we suffer with that we want to be quote unquote healed from is pain, right?
Mm,
And a lot of pain, like there's been recent studies that have had done cognitive behavioral therapy to deal with pain. In other words, if people's thought process about their pain changes,
mm,
their pain changes, right? Like
interesting.
pains caused by neurons firing. Like this can some of it can be controlled by our thoughts. And so if somebody is told authoritatively that they now do not have pain and they believe that they now do not have pain, it is very possible that they will not have pain.
Mm,
And something dramatic has happened, but it isn't something miraculous.
interesting.
It is a natural process that God has built right into the structure of our bodies.
Mm,
So all of that being said, for me personally, my bar
would be
for
higher.
miracles is really high. Like it has to be something where there is no odds of this happening.
Mm,
This cannot happen without God intervening. And when we look at the times in history where God put his sign of approval on something, he did that level of miracles.
it was
So
extreme. It was impossible.
yes, right. And so it totally put God's stamp of approval on what was happening.
Instead of there
So,
being any kind of, you know what? Maybe we can take advantage of this. Maybe we can take advantage of this faith for more popularity for our church so that more people came.
right.
Yeah.
So that doesn't take away from the fact that the Bible talks about people having these spiritual gifts in the church.
Mm.
Um, I'll just read from First Corinthians 12, and it says, this is in verse 7. A spiritual gift is given to each of us so we can help each other. Big important thing about spiritual gifts. They're never for you or me. They're always for somebody else. So God gives me a gift, but it's
Mm.
really for you, right?
That's interesting because Jesus, like his miracles were never for him. Like even when the devil tempted him, hey, you could feed
Yes,
yourself right now. No, he did not do that.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So it's always for someone else.
Yeah. And so I know we're not talking about tongues here, but that can lead into the discussion about tongues because so much of what tongues is used for today is for personal edification for yourself, which
Mm.
that
Doesn't
that totally
that doesn't
violates,
track. Yeah.
right? That's so I'm not saying whether it's real or not or anything. I'm just saying it's not being used properly if it's for yourself, right?
Mm.
Anyway, uh, goes on, it says, to one person, the Spirit gives the ability to give wise advice. To another, the same Spirit gives a message of special knowledge. The same Spirit gives great faith to another, and to someone else, the Spirit gives the gift of healing. And he gives one person the power to perform miracles, and another the ability to prophesy. He gives someone else the ability to discern whether a message is from God or not, and just keeps on going. But you get the idea. Like here, Paul is talking to the church, and he says, "Some of you have the gift of healing and to do miracles and
Mm.
speaking in unknown languages and those type of things." So that would lead me to say, I can never say for me personally that there could never be somebody that has the gift of miracles,
Mm.
the gifts of healing legitimately. Um, I have a gut feeling, but
Right.
gut feelings are not how you build theology, right?
Right. I wish. I wish.
Yes. He, here's here's how I see it in my brain, and you can poke holes in this, but this is how
Okay.
I see it. Every time God did a major change in history, it was always accompanied by signs and wonders,
Right.
miracles, right? There is no bigger change in human history than God's dealing with the nation of Israel under the old contract, what we call the old covenant, and how God is now dealing with all people everywhere under this new contract
Right.
established by Jesus. This is the biggest change ever, most
Yep.
significant change ever. So, what would you expect, right? You would
There to
expect
be signs then.
signs and
This
wonders.
is
Like,
it, guys.
yeah. And so what you get is the biggest piling of miracles anywhere in scripture.
Mm.
And the peak of it is the Messiah himself, the promised one, being killed, being buried, 3 days later, rising from the dead. Like
Mm.
this is this is like signs to everyone,
Right.
signs to the unseen world that hey, um, your days are numbered. Your power is gone.
Mm.
It's signed to the Jewish people saying the old contract is done. We have something new. That the new covenant, the new contract that was promised in the Old Testament has arrived. The Messiah is here. Like it was a sign to the Gentiles that hey,
Mm.
there is a real God and he has real power and
Yep.
you need to transfer your faith to him,
Right.
not these other idols and other beings that you're worshiping. So there was a purpose to this big massive pile of miracles. But here's something we miss. The transition from the old contract to the new was not like a light switch. It wasn't
No,
like
it was a process.
right.
It was gradual.
Think of it like a valve being turned. Okay.
Mm.
So it takes a while, it takes time for that transition to happen. And it's if you think like a wave
Right.
going out, right? a rock hits in the water and the waves go out.
And
So
the ripples.
that's right. And so the announcement of God's new contract, or what the Bible authors called the gospel, the good news, right? This new way that we can be made right with God through Jesus. This transition happened as a process over time and space, right?
Mm,
So as the message went into new locations, guess what accompanied that, right? These
mm.
signs
These
and
signs
wonders
and wonders.
and miracles. And so as the good news spread, that there was a wave of these miracles that spread too. And that's just historically what happened.
Mm.
And I remember studying this out years ago, and it's like 8052 is like this magic number. Like it's actually after Paul finishes writing to the church in Corinth, which was one of his earlier writings. Um, in any of his subsequent writings, he never mentions these miraculous signs again.
Interesting.
Um, and then you get stories like in Philippians where there are people serving God and they're sick and they're not getting healed. Paul's
Mm.
praying to get healed and he's not getting healed. Like it seems like everything changed a little bit after that wave went out and after
Mm.
the announcement of Jesus' resurrection went out into the world. The type of miracles and the number of miracles seem to have reduced.
Decreased.
Yeah. And so I'm not in the camp in theology called cessationalist or whatever. Like it's like that belief that there are no more miracles, there aren't no more tongues. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it would be very unique situations where God is
God is doing
really,
something,
that's right. And I've just never seen it in my life. And
right?
there's nothing I've anything I've ever read, when I read other people's accounts of what they would call miraculous signs, they never have reached my bar of what I would consider a miracle. And I'm not arbitrarily setting that. I'm trying
Trying to follow
to look.
to what in the past had been
That's right.
a miracle.
That's right. And so do miracles still happen? Well, it depends how you define miracles. Do people
Mm.
still get a, a terminal diagnosis and recover?
Yeah,
Yeah, that happens. And is it okay to pray for God to work? Well,
of
yeah,
course.
like right. And but those, I would never go around saying, "Oh, that was a miracle,"
Fascinating.
right? Um, because in my mind, it doesn't reach that bar of what God established as a sign or a miracle from Him.
Mm. I'd love to get your take on something
Yeah.
if your thought was finished.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's fascinating. So many of the different social systems and medical advancements that have come from Christian believers who are dedicated towards helping others, um, people who truly want to bring God's kingdom to earth by serving people, whether it's through, what if orphanages were a thing? What if we could take care of people? What if we could um, take care of others with glasses, like these things like this? Would you consider that a miracle in the sense of, God working through his people, working together to make
Mhm.
something that had God's kingdom not be in effect?
Yeah.
Maybe that would
Would never.
that would never happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Matter of
Right.
fact, when Jesus said to his disciples, like you'll do greater things
Mm,
than me, like you'll have a greater impact on the world than me. I think that's what he was getting at.
mm,
Was was as the church follows the kingdom way
mm,
and brings good to others in the name of Jesus,
right.
as we do that, through the work of Christians around the world, we have healed way more people than Jesus did.
Yeah, we
We have
have.
fed way more people than
Yeah.
Jesus did. We've done far greater things than Jesus did just by following his heart,
Mm,
right? And so absolutely, and I would call that a miracle
right.
because if you look at where society was going before Jesus,
Good
it
luck.
didn't have any of that, right?
No.
This is so significant that Time magazine declared Jesus the man of the millennium for 2 millenniums running in the year 2000
That's awesome.
because of the impact that he has had on people and the impact that those people have had in
Mm,
turn on the world, right? And the good that has been brought into the world through him. And so, and that's not even talking about the spiritual thing, right? That the biggest miracles is God taking us from being enemies of his
to
to
being
making
made
us
right.
made right to be his children, right?
That's
Reign.
incredible. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Like that's a miracle. And in changing our mindsets, changing
Mm,
our behaviors and changing like this is these are the true miracles.
mm,
And the miracles, here's the big part, those miracles last.
yeah.
Like if somebody gets their hip pain removed, no disrespect to anybody, but big deal. Like all that means is back pain is coming for you, right? Like so you get rid of
Right.
one pain, but there's gonna be something else. And it, it's so temporary, right?
Mm,
But the true miracles are not temporary. They are eternal, like us being a child of God, the
yeah.
good that God brings through us into the world. Well, the rewards for that are eternal, and so are the outcomes from that eternal,
Mm,
right? So these are the greater miracles that we should be seeking. And I get nervous sometimes, and I think people get too passionate about lesser miracles,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. When I see someone, like I could think of even from my own life, somebody who would be completely against God, somebody who unwilling to accept Jesus, hate him even, and then have this truly miraculous switch of mindset. When that heart
Yeah.
changes, that's not
Hmm.
something that people do.
That's right.
That's something that God does to take hold of people. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. And back to your initial point, which is excellent, by the way, the acts of the church or acts of Christ followers being in a sense miraculous fits perfectly with the teaching of Jesus, where he told us to be lights and to
Mm,
not put our light under a bushel, that we're the salt of the earth, all of that
yeah.
stuff, that it would be our good works that would make the gospel attractive and bring people to faith in God. In other words, our positive impact on the world is the new sign.
Mm,
It's the new way of people seeing that this is from God. And so sadly, if the church gets focused on things that excludes bringing goodness into the world,
and they're
then our
wasting their
light is
time.
now hidden.
Yeah.
What's that?
I said they're wasting their time.
Yes.
Like
Yeah,
the mission that we're trying to accomplish, we're not.
right.
Yeah.
And obviously that doesn't mean that we just do good things and never talk about Jesus,
Right. Because he's the
because it's got
reason we can do good things.
exactly, and
Yeah.
and it it all comes back to him, and without that message then it's meaningless, but you have to have both together, right? Yeah.
Mm, that's fascinating. Incredible. Well, I'm going to take this time just to invite any of you who are watching to subscribe. If you want to continue to watch or listen to our thoughts on these different topics, we'd love to hear your thoughts and comments as well down below. But check out the next things that we do or the past ones that we've done because we certainly like to talk on here.
Yeah,
It's a
we
great way
sure
to
do.
put it, Matt.
Yeah.
All right. Here's our next question, and I believe we do have time for it, I think.
Yeah, we'll go for it.
I remember in well, it was Sunday school. I think I was told this story for the first time when the Israelite spies in, was it the book of Joshua, I believe?
Yeah.
Yeah, the spies go into Jericho and they're kind of spying around and they get trapped. Or somebody's coming to find them, and they all hide in this woman's house, Rahab, which the text describes her as a prostitute. Um, all of these spies, they hide in her house, and when the guards come uh, to say, "Hey, are you hiding any Israelite spies?" She says, "No," but she was. And then they're able to go free. And not only that, Rahab is saved, and then is through her family line, Jesus Christ comes. So
Mm.
this is there's a little bit of an interesting juxtaposition here because she lied, and lying is wrong, right? But then through that lie, the savior of the world could be born. What does this mean? How could this be?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Thanks, Donovan, right?
Yes, thank you,
Great
Donovan.
question.
This is fun.
Um, so, so the phrase "the end justifies the means." I think we all understand that, right? Like, so
Right,
does this mean that I can do bad in order to do good?
right.
Um,
It's like the trolley
and
problem. Do you pull the switch to let the trolley
yeah,
go to the other track where it would kill less people? I don't know.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it leads us into those type of discussions, right?
Right.
Um, so some of it is depends here on our perspective, and I'll try to give um another angle as well in a second here, but let me just say this. Maybe instead of using the phrase "the end justifies the means," maybe we should be talking about lesser of two evils,
Mm,
because there are legitimate situations that we get into that it's just messy. Like last Sunday was talking about Jesus washing the disciples' feet, and he
mm,
talked about the fact when Peter was, I guess, protesting and saying, "Jesus, you don't wash my feet," right?
right.
Um, Jesus said, "Hey, if I don't wash you, like, right, you no part with me."
Yeah.
And there was this statement by Jesus that, "Hey, like you've been washed, but your feet are dirty." In other words, you're you're right with God, but just in living in this messy world, you get soiled, right?
Mm,
You can't live this life perfectly.
right.
It is impossible. And God didn't create us to be perfect in the first place,
Right.
he created us to be good. And living in an imperfect world means it is impossible to get through it untainted in some way.
Mm,
And so there are legitimate situations that we get into that we do have to make these lesser of two evils
calls.
choices.
Right.
Um, and this was definitely one of them. If I could bring a modern day illustration of this, think of the people living in Europe when
Mm,
uh, Hitler was basically exterminating the Jews, right?
right.
And you had people who opposed the law of the government
Right.
to hide these Jewish people to save their lives. Was that right or wrong? Right?
Mm,
I would argue it was 100% right.
of course.
Right? Now, were they disobeying government, which the Bible tells us not to do? Yes, right?
Mm,
Yeah, they were. But they were accomplishing a greater good.
mm,
Um,
that's right.
and there are just some situations in life where it is impossible to do good without getting yourself muddied a little.
Mm,
Just because of how broken the world is. This isn't on Rahab, right? This isn't on
no.
the people in Europe that protected the Jews. This is
The
on
sin that would
Hitler. You know,
make them do that.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so here's where I think is um there's a flaw in our thinking, perhaps that's brought in simply by. I'll give you this example. So we're getting maybe a little bit critical of Rahab for telling a lie, right? So first of all, where do we get this idea that lying is wrong?
The Ten Commandments.
Ten Commandments, which Rahab, that meant nothing to her.
That is true. She wasn't a Jew.
She wasn't a Jew.
She
She
wouldn't have
wasn't
had
under
them.
that contract.
Yeah.
Like so the just so everybody's aware, the Old Testament, the old contract was a list of a whole bunch of laws. And if you broke one of those laws, you broke the entire contract, right? And you were now guilty
Right.
of the contract. And so um this was not a good deal. Okay,
No.
let's just put that out there.
It
Matter of
was
fact, I
tough.
think it was Joshua that tried to argue with the Jewish people not to enter into this contract because it was so unfavorable to them, right?
You guys
But
aren't
they
going to be
did.
able to follow this. What are
That's
you
right.
doing?
Right. And so it accomplished God's perfect will in a beautiful way.
Mm,
But it definitely was not favorable for the Jewish people.
no.
So so Rahab technically was not under that contract, right?
Right.
And we as Christians are not under that contract. What we are under is God's heart
Mm,
and his passion for us to love others and to bring goodness into the world.
because of what Jesus did.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so again, Rahab wasn't breaking this contract because she wasn't under it, first of all.
Right.
But no matter what, no matter which angle you look at this, what she did was right.
Yeah.
Just like what people did in Europe was right.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't get caught up in the technicalities because there are honestly situations where you are darned if you do, darned if you don't. Like there's no pure way out. We are not perfect beings. We like Jesus got himself out of situations where you'd think, how's he going to get out of that? But he, yes, was entirely human, but he was also the perfect Son of God in a way that we not just aren't, but we can never be, right?
Mm,
And so Rahab was doing the best she could
right.
with the cards she was dealt.
Yeah.
And I would say she did well,
She did
right?
really well.
Right? Yeah, and so again, those people in Europe, they were dealt a very bad hand, right?
Mm,
And some people did as much good as they could with that bad hand, and some just collapsed and participated with the greater evil, right?
right.
So, so do you want this to go from bad to worse?
Yeah, I'm always down for bad to worse, Greg.
Okay, listen to this one. Okay.
Okay.
Um, this is from First Kings. It says,
Oh,
then uh, Micah can or Micaiah continued, listen to what the Lord says. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the armies of heaven around him, on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, who can entice Ahab to go into battle against Ramoth Gilead so he can be killed? There were many suggestions, and finally a spirit appeared or approached the Lord and said, I can do it. How will you do this? The Lord asked. And the Spirit replied, I will go out and inspire all of Ahab's prophets to speak lies. You will succeed, said the Lord. Go ahead and do it. So you see, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all your prophets, for the Lord has pronounced your doom.
whoa.
Okay? Got any questions?
This is reminding me a little bit of Habakkuk. Um,
Yeah.
when Habakkuk is like, God, wait a second. Are you working with the people who are against us? Are you working to try to cause our destruction?
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult. What on earth?
Right. So here you've got Ahab, who is a legitimately awful individual, just bringing great sin, right?
Right.
And not just for himself, but for the whole nation, right?
Mm,
Um, and like God could have had a heart attack, died in his sleep,
Yeah.
and this would all be irrelevant, right?
So all the
But
prophets are
God,
gonna lie.
that's right. But God doesn't intervene in that way, which is, I think, the norm. Um, uh, but it is God's will for his time as king to be over,
Mm,
right? And so um, he has one of these in the Old Testament. They're called divine council meetings. He has this council meeting, and this is what the prophet is describing. And the option that is thrown out there is, hey, let's get all of the people that he listens to tell him to go to battle, right? Um, and God says, go ahead and do it.
right.
How do we understand this, right?
That's
Is
hard.
is God endorsing lying here? Like, what? So
Yeah.
a couple things that help us again. First of all, God is not doing the lying, right?
Mm,
But God is aware that in this world,
lying is a
um,
factor,
exactly,
right?
and and so, uh, so God does not stop lying prophets.
Mm,
And if you look into the context, the prophets already were doing this,
right.
right? And they already wanted to do this. So it's not this spirit causing them to do something they didn't want to do.
Mm.
It was basically like letting them continue to do what was already in their heart to do, right?
Yeah, we see that. I feel like we see that a lot. Well, throughout the Old Testament specifically, where these powers of sin and corruption are used as punishment because of their natural cycle of
Yes.
corruption in people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there's that and that so again, God is not quote unquote sinning, but here are these beings and these prophets and Ahab, and they're in this broken world where one of the methods that many things happen is deception
Mm,
or misinformation. And so God says, okay, let the misinformation continue, is
right.
basically what is being said here. Now, here's another option. Um, the prophet might have been just talking smack. Okay. Because these false prophets were already lying, right?
Right.
And and he's in this position where it's him against all of them.
Mm,
And he could have just been telling a story. In other words, the prophet might not have actually seen all of these things or heard all of these things. He might have been just saying, because of his, because what he's describing here is what's described all through the Old Testament of these meetings where God meets with these spiritual beings and they make decisions and there's right. So he might
yeah.
have just been speaking what he knew and saying, you know why your prophets are all saying the same thing, right? Because they're all following the same lying spirit, right?
Right.
He could have just been talking smack because he's, if you read the context, he is on the fly. He's either making this up or he saw these things previously, but he never told anybody about it.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know which is true, but at the end of the day, here's what I think we can take away that in this fallen world, God can not just use good, perfect decisions, he can also use flawed and even wrong decisions to
Mm,
produce good.
yeah.
So with Rahab, yes, technically her lying was not perfect. Okay.
Mm.
But he could even use that in the bringing together the Messiah.
What a great God.
Yes. So
Wow.
so everything else in creation can take good and make it evil.
Mm,
God is the only one that can take evil and
evil
bring good
and
out
make
of it.
it good.
Yes.
Wow. What a great God that we serve that does that. That
And
is, that's immense.
and it should not give us a low standard,
Mm,
but it should make it so that we understand that we don't have to be perfect.
mm,
We need to do good, and sometimes it is kind of the lesser of evils. Like, I don't know, practical level, like um, if you if you're making choices like to try to have the least negative environmental impact possible, right?
Right.
Um, well, first of all, there's all kinds of different opinions on that, right?
Right.
What is clean energy, what isn't? But at the end of the day, if you're using any type of energy, it's
There's
causing
gonna,
some harm,
yeah, in the
right?
production, either in the actual fuel you're burning or in the production of the parts in your whatever.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So you you have to make these lesser of two evils
Decisions.
choices, or you say I will do nothing. But there's a problem with that. For example, the Amish would say I I'm not going to touch any of it. I'm just going to stay
Mm.
away from it. Um, but if our objective is to bring the most good to the world that we possibly can,
Let's use
well,
what we have.
right, the Amish are
Yeah.
actually missing out. So they're doing less harm, but they're also doing exponentially less good,
Mm.
right? So so we have to make like we can't get through this life perfectly and clean. We have to make good choices.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I pray that God gives us those good choices when we're stuck in those situations, because it can be really difficult to choose sometimes. And the only way we can make those right decisions is to look at the champion, the perfect example who made good decisions in all situations, Jesus Christ. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching our podcast for today, questions and almost answers. I think we gave you some almost answers today. Uh, I'm so thankful that you could come out and listen to us jabber on. If you'd like to give us some more questions, we are always looking for more interesting things to discuss. We'd love to hear your thoughts on our discussions down below. And please connect with us on Facebook. If you'd like to come and visit us in church, I give you formal permission to come up and shake my hand at the next service that you come at our church. But guys, thank you all for coming and watching. I am Matt, and this is Greg, and this has been Questions and Almost Answers.